The canyon walls rose
Both
like
sides.
ancient tombstones against the blood-red sunset,
stand together
and Jake Hawkins
fall
knew he
apart.
was riding straight into hell. The thundering hooves behind him had been gaining ground for the last 3 miles, and his horse Duchess was starting to falter. Her breath came in ragged gasps, foam flecking her mouth as she pushed through the narrow passage between towering rocks. "Come on, girl," Jake whispered, leaning low over her neck. "Just a little further." The Winchester rifle strapped to his saddle had exactly 3 bullets left. 3 bullets against 7 men. Those weren't odds that even a gambling man would take, and Jake had given up gambling along with everything else after Antietam. But sometimes the house deals you a hand you have to play, whether you like it or not. The first shot cracked through the evening air, splintering rock inches from his head. Jake didn't flinch. After 4 years of war, gunfire was as familiar as breathing. What worried him more was the narrowing canyon ahead. If it dead-ended, he'd be trapped like a rabbit in a snare. "Should have stayed in Texas, Hawkins." The voice echoed off the canyon walls belonging to Bull Morrison, leader of the gang that had been tracking him since Tucson. "You killed my brother. Time to settle accounts." Jake hadn't meant to kill anyone. Tommy Morrison had drawn first in that saloon, drunk and mean, waving his gun at a Mexican family just trying to have supper. Jake had simply been faster. It was always the same story. Trying to mind his own business, getting pulled into someone else's fight, leaving another ghost in his wake. The canyon twisted sharply to the left, and Jake pulled hard on the reins. That's when he saw it. A figure standing atop the ridge, silhouetted against the dying light. Not one of Morrison's men. This figure held a bow arrow, nocked and ready. An Apache warrior, young from the looks of him, maybe 17 or 18. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, Jake and the warrior locked eyes. The young Apache's face was painted for war, white stripes across dark skin, but there was something in his gaze. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe just the acknowledgement of one hunted creature to another. The Morrison gang rounded the corner at full gallop, guns blazing. Jake expected to feel an arrow pierce his back. Instead, the Apache warrior turned his bow toward the pursuers. The first arrow found its mark in Bull Morrison's shoulder, sending him tumbling from his horse with a scream that echoed through the canyon like a wounded animal. "Apache! Apache!" The cry went up among the gang members, panic replacing bloodlust in an instant. Nothing scared outlaws quite like Apache warriors, especially in their own territory. Jake didn't waste the opportunity. He wheeled Duchess around, firing his 3 precious bullets in rapid succession. One man fell, clutching his leg. Another's horse reared, throwing its rider against the canyon wall. The third shot went wide, but it didn't matter. The combination of Apache arrows raining from above and Jake's gunfire below set the remaining gang members fleeing back the way they came, Bull Morrison draped over a saddle, cursing and bleeding. As the dust settled and silence returned to the canyon, Jake found himself alone with the young warrior who had descended from the ridge with the fluid grace of a mountain cat. Up close, Jake could see the boy was even younger than he'd thought, with intelligent eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond his years. "Why?" Jake asked, simply, his hand resting on his empty gun. The warrior studied him for a long moment, then spoke in accented but clear English. "You fought at Antietam, September 17, 1862. Jake's blood ran cold. "How could you possibly know that?" "My sister's husband was there, Union soldier. He spoke of a Confederate who saved his unit from ambush, then disappeared into the smoke. Said the man had eyes like winter sky and moved like ghost." The warrior gestured at Jake's pale blue eyes. "He drew picture in dirt many times. You are him." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Jake remembered that day, the bloodiest in American history. He'd been scouting for Lee's army when he'd stumbled upon a Union platoon about to walk into a trap. He could have let them die. Should have, according to military law. Instead, he'd fired warning shots alerting them to the danger before melting back into the chaos of battle. He never knew if any of them survived. Your sister, Jake said slowly. She's Apache. The warrior nodded. Ayanna. She mourns him still. Died 2 winters ago fighting for our land. He paused, then added, My father, Chief Nashota, is dying. He wishes to meet the ghost soldier who saved his son-in-law. Will you come? Jake looked at his exhausted horse, at the empty gun in his holster, at the blood on his hands from the fight. He had nowhere else to go, no one waiting for him, nothing but more running and fighting ahead. Maybe it was time to stop running from ghosts and face them instead. Lead the way, he said. The young warrior smiled for the first time, transforming his face from fierce to almost boyish. I am Talon. Father will be pleased. He has been having visions about you. Visions? Jake asked, falling into step beside the warrior as they led Duchess through a hidden path in the canyon wall. The eagle told him a man with winter eyes would come bearing old wounds and older sorrows, that this man would bridge 2 worlds and heal what was broken. Talon glanced at him sideways. Father's visions always come true. As they walked deeper into Apache territory, the sunset fading to purple twilight, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking towards something larger than himself, something that had been set in motion long before Tommy Morrison drew his gun in that Tucson saloon. Behind them, the canyon held its secrets, blood seeping into ancient sand. Ahead, somewhere in the gathering darkness, an old chief lay dying with prophecies on his lips, and 2 women waited unknowingly for a stranger who would change their lives forever. The desert wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the scent of sage and something else. Destiny, perhaps, or just the promise of rain after a long drought. Jake Hawkins had survived Antietam, Gettysburg, and a dozen battles that killed better men than him. But as he followed the young Apache warrior into the unknown, he wondered if he was finally walking toward the one fight he couldn't walk away from, the battle for his own redemption. The Apache camp materialized from the desert like a mirage, becoming real cooking fires dotting the darkness like earthbound stars. Jake had expected hostility, perhaps even violence, but instead found curious eyes tracking his movement with guarded interest. Children peered from behind their mother's skirts, and warriors nodded slightly as Talon passed their acknowledgement, extending to the white man who rode beside him. Chief Nashota's wickiup stood at the camp's heart, larger than the others, with symbols painted in red and white across the buffalo hide covering. The smell of burning cedar and sage drifted from within, mixed with something else. The distinctive scent of approaching death that Jake knew too well from battlefield hospitals. Inside the space was dimly lit by a central fire shadows dancing across the assembled faces. Chief Nashota lay on a bed of woven blankets, his once powerful frame reduced to sharp angles and labored breathing. But his eyes, dark and penetrating, held a strength that transcended his failing body. The ghost soldier, Nashota said in English, his voice like wind through dry leaves. I have waited. Beside the chief sat 2 women, and Jake felt the air shift the moment he saw them. The first, positioned to Nashota's right, possessed the kind of beauty that spoke of strength rather than delicacy. This was Ayanna. He knew instantly from the grief that lined her face like a map of sorrow. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, with hair black as midnight, woven into a single braid adorned with silver ornaments. Her dark eyes held his for a moment, and in them he saw recognition pain, and something else, a flicker of hope quickly suppressed. You saved him, she said simply, her voice carrying the melody of her Apache accent. My Thomas. At Antietam. He lived 3 more years because of you. Jake removed his hat, running weathered fingers through hair that had gone prematurely gray. I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. Don't apologize for giving me 3 years I wouldn't have had. Her words were firm, but tears threatened at the corners of her eyes. He spoke of you often, said you moved through the battlefield like you belonged to neither side, just humanity. The second woman seated to Neshota's left was younger, perhaps early 20s, with an ethereal quality that seemed at odds with the harsh desert environment. Where Ayanna was earth and stone, this woman, Suli, was air and water. Her face bore the delicate features of mixed heritage, and when she looked up at Jake, he was startled to see eyes the color of sage honey, unusual for a full-blooded Apache. "My father was Mexican," Suli said as if reading his thoughts. "My mother, Apache. I belong to neither world fully, but Chief Neshota gave me a place when my own people would not." Her voice carried an educated cadence, and Jake noticed a book, incredibly a leather-bound volume of Shakespeare, resting beside her. She followed his gaze and offered a sad smile. "The missionaries taught me to read before they decided I was cursed." She placed a protective hand over her flat stomach. 5 years of marriage to my first husband, no children. 2 years with Chief Neshota, still no children. They say I carry emptiness inside me where life should grow. "Enough," Neshota commanded weakly but with authority. "You are not cursed, child. You are waiting for the right season to bloom." The old chief's attention returned to Jake, studying him with an intensity that seemed to peer into his soul. "Tell me, ghost soldier, what do you see when you close your eyes?" Jake stiffened. It was a question no one had ever asked directly, though many had seen the answer in his haunted expression. "Fire," he admitted. "Always fire." "Your family," Neshota prompted gently. The words came unbidden, pulled from him by something in the chief's manner. "Wife and daughter, Sarah and little Emma. General Sherman's march through Georgia. I was in Virginia with Lee when it happened. Neighbors said the house went up like kindling. They were supposed to be safe. I was the one supposed to die in the war, not them." Ayanna made a soft sound of understanding. "The survivor's burden, to live when those we love do not. My Thomas died defending reservation land from settlers who wanted our water," she continued, her voice steady despite the pain in it. "Shot in the back while trying to negotiate peace. They said an Apache warrior deserved no better, but he wasn't just Apache. He was a Union veteran, fought at Antietam, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, fought for a country that still saw him as less than human." Suli added quietly, "My first husband cast me out when I couldn't give him sons. My own family agreed with his decision. Chief Neshota found me by the river preparing to join the spirits. He offered me marriage not for love or desire, but for protection. He said every soul deserves a place to belong." The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling upward through the smoke hole. Jake found himself sitting cross-legged on the ground, his body suddenly heavy with exhaustion. These women weren't what he'd expected. They were educated, articulate, carrying griefs that matched his own. The West was full of broken people trying to build something from the shards of their former lives, but these two seemed different somehow, as if their breaking had revealed something stronger underneath. "Why am I here?" Jake asked finally. "Your son said something about visions." Neshota's weathered face creased into what might have been a smile. 3 nights ago, the eagle came to me in dreams. It showed me 3 souls wandering in darkness. A soldier haunted by ghosts he couldn't save, a widow warrior who fights battles that are already lost, and a young woman who believes her womb is a grave. He paused, breathing laboriously. The eagle showed me these souls finding each other, creating something new from their broken pieces. "That's a nice story, Chief, but I'm not the man for anyone's salvation. I can't even save myself." "Who asks you to save anyone?" Neshota countered. "I ask only that you protect. There is a difference." The chief gestured weakly, and Talon helped him sit up slightly. The effort clearly cost him, but his voice gained strength. "My people face troubled times. The reservation boundaries shift like sand. The army builds forts closer each season. My warrior band grows smaller as young men leave for towns seeking new ways. When I die, and it will be soon, Ayanna and Suli will be vulnerable. Apache law says they should marry within the tribe, but the young warriors see Ayanna as too strong, too independent. They fear her. And Suli. He shook his head sadly. They see her as cursed. You want me to marry them? Jake's voice was flat with disbelief. Both of them. Apache custom allows it when circumstances demand. You would give them protection under white law as well as Apache tradition. Your name would shield them from both worlds. This is insane. I'm nobody. I own nothing but a tired horse and an empty gun. I'm running from men who want me dead. How does that protect anyone? Ayanna spoke up, her voice cutting through his protests. You stood against 7 men in that canyon. Talon told us. You face danger without flinching. That is who you are, not what you own. Suli added softly. Sometimes protection isn't about strength. Sometimes it's about someone choosing to stand beside you when the world turns away. Jake looked between the 2 women, then at the dying chief. The rational part of his mind screamed to get up, walk out Mount Duchess, and ride until he hit the Pacific Ocean. But another part, a part he'd thought died with Sarah and Emma, recognized something in these people, a shared understanding of loss of continuing to breathe when breathing felt like betrayal to the dead. What do you say to this? He asked the women directly. This affects your lives more than mine. Ayanna met his gaze steadily. I say that I have been alone for 2 winters fighting battles I cannot win. I am tired of being strong by myself. If sharing that burden with you and Suli means survival for all of us, then I accept. Suli's response was quieter, but no less firm. I have been told I am worthless because I cannot bear children, but perhaps there are other ways to create family, other things to nurture and grow. I would rather take this chance than waste away in solitude. The fire had burned low, casting deeper shadows across the wickiup. Outside, Jake could hear the camp settling for the night, mothers calling children, horses nickering, the distant sound of a flute playing a mournful tune. It was a sound of community, of belonging, something he hadn't experienced since before the war. Chief Nashota lay back exhausted from the conversation. You don't need to decide tonight, Ghost Soldier, but know this. The eagle's visions always come true. You can fight destiny, but it flows like water, finding its way around every obstacle. Jake stood, his joints protesting from sitting on the hard ground. I need air. I need to think. As he moved toward the entrance, Nashota's voice followed him. Jake Hawkins, you think you walk among the living as a dead man, but perhaps you've been waiting to be reborn. The desert has a way of bringing dead things back to life, if you give it time. Outside, the night sky stretched infinite and star-filled above the camp. Jake found himself walking toward the edge of the settlement, where the desert began its vast expansion toward tomorrow. Duchess whickered softly as he approached, nuzzling his shoulder with familiar affection. What have we gotten ourselves into, girl? He murmured, stroking her neck. He sensed rather than heard someone approach. Ayanna stood a respectful distance away, her face silvered by moonlight. You think us desperate, she said. It wasn't a question. Aren't you? Yes, she admitted simply. But desperation and wisdom sometimes walk the same path. My Thomas used to say that the war taught him that broken people could still build unbroken things if they built them together. She turned to leave, then paused. That book Suli reads, Shakespeare. There's a line she quotes often, what's past is prologue. Perhaps our griefs are not endings, but beginnings we haven't recognized yet. As her footsteps faded back toward the camp, Jake stood alone under the vast desert sky, wrestling with the strangest proposition of his strange life. 3 broken souls, a dying chief's vision, and a choice that would either be the worst mistake of his life, or maybe the first step toward something he'd thought lost forever. A reason to stop running. Jake couldn't sleep. The guest wickiup the Apache had provided was comfortable enough. Soft buffalo hides, woven blankets that smelled of sage. the distant comfort of a community at rest around him. But comfort had become foreign to his body after years of sleeping with one eye open, and tonight his mind churned like a storm-swollen river. He lay on his back, staring at the stars visible through the smoke hole, and let the memories come. They always did in the quiet hours before dawn, when his defenses were weakest. "Papa, look, I caught a firefly." Emma's voice echoed across 5 years clear as spring water. She'd been 4 that last summer, her blonde curls bouncing as she ran through the Georgia Twilight mason jar clutched in chubby fingers. Sarah had been sitting on the porch, her pregnancy showing beneath her blue calico dress, laughing at their daughter's determination to catch every firefly in Cobb County. "Careful, baby girl," Jake had called out, scooping Emma up and spinning her around, her giggles mixing with the cricket songs. "Those fireflies are tricky. They go dark just when you think you've got them." "Like you, Papa Mama says you're tricky too." Sarah had smiled from the porch, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "Your papa's not tricky, sweet pea. He's just good at keeping us safe." 3 months later, Jake had ridden north with General Lee's army, promising to be home by Christmas. The baby would be born by then. A son, Sarah insisted, though Jake secretly hoped for another daughter. He'd kissed them both goodbye on a morning that smelled of honeysuckle and coming rain, Emma clinging to his leg, begging him not to go. "The war will be over soon," he'd promised, prying her small fingers loose. "And when I come back, I'll teach you and your brother or sister how to ride. Would you like that?" She nodded solemnly, tears streaming down her round cheeks. "You promise to come back?" "I promise, baby girl. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." The last letter from Sarah had reached him at Chancellorsville. The baby had come early, another girl named Rose for Sarah's mother. "She has your eyes," Sarah had written. "That same winter blue that sees through everything. Emma insists on helping with everything. She says she's practicing for when Papa comes home. We miss you terribly, but we're safe. The war seems far away from here. Come home to us whole, my love. That's all that matters." 2 weeks later, Sherman had begun his march to the sea. Jake sat up abruptly, sweat beading his forehead despite the cool desert night. He pushed out of the wickiup, needing air, needing movement, needing anything but the crushing weight of memory. The camp was silent except for the occasional dog bark and the whisper of wind through cottonwood trees near the stream. He found himself walking toward the horse corral, where Duchess stood, dozing with the Apache ponies. But he wasn't alone. Ayanna sat on a flat rock overlooking the corral, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her face turned toward the stars. "Can't sleep either?" she asked without looking at him. "Sleep and I parted ways years ago," Jake admitted, settling onto a nearby rock. I dream of Thomas on nights like this," she said softly. "Clear nights when the stars look close enough to touch." He used to say the stars were the campfires of warriors who had gone ahead, keeping watch over those still walking the earth. "That's a beautiful thought." "It's a lie we tell ourselves," she said with sudden bitterness. "The dead don't watch over anyone. They're just gone, and we're left here trying to make sense of the empty spaces they left behind." Her harsh honesty was refreshing after years of platitudes and sympathy. "How did you meet him?" Jake asked. Ayanna pulled the blanket tighter. "After Antietam. He was wounded not badly, but enough to be sent west for recovery. The Army assigned him to Fort Buchanan. He was part of a patrol that came to investigate reports of Apache raids." She smiled slightly. "Except there were no raids, just my father's band hunting on our traditional lands that the new map said belonged to settlers now." "Let me guess, Thomas didn't arrest anyone." "Worse, he fell off his horse right in front of me." She actually laughed to sound like water over stones. "This big, strong soldier who'd survived one of the bloodiest battles in history, and he falls off his horse because he was staring at me instead of watching where he was riding. My father's warriors thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen." They called him Falls from Horse for months. But you married him anyway. Not at first. It took him 6 months of visiting, learning our language, bringing terrible gifts. He once brought me a live skunk thinking it was a cat. Before I agreed to speak more than 3 words to him, her smile faded. But he was persistent and kind. He saw me not as some exotic prize or savage to be civilized, but as myself. Do you know how rare that is to be seen as you truly are? Jake thought of Sarah, how she'd seen past his rough exterior to something worth loving. Yeah, I know. Tell me about them, Ayanna said gently. Your family. Sometimes speaking the ghosts' names helps them rest. Jake found himself talking words spilling out like blood from a wound. He told her about meeting Sarah at a church social, how she'd laughed when he'd stepped on her foot during a dance. About Emma's birth during a thunderstorm, how she'd come into the world screaming louder than the thunder. About teaching Emma to fish in the Chattahoochee River, her determination to bait her own hook, despite her fear of worms. The neighbor who survived Mrs. Henderson, she told me later, that they'd tried to run when they saw the smoke from other farms. But Emma wouldn't leave without her doll, the one I'd carved for her from pine. Sarah went back for it. His voice cracked. The roof collapsed while they were inside. The baby. Rose. They found her in her crib. Smoke, they said. She never woke up. Ayanna reached over and took his hand, her touch warm and solid. Thomas died protecting children too. Settler kids whose father had decided to dam our stream. The father shot Thomas when he tried to negotiate, then claimed self-defense. The children, though, they testified that Thomas had been trying to make peace. It didn't matter to the court, but it mattered to me. He died being exactly who he was, a protector. They sat in companionable silence until footsteps approached. Suli emerged from the darkness, also wrapped in a blanket, her honey-colored eyes luminous in the starlight. I heard voices, she said apologetically. I didn't mean to intrude. You're not, Ayanna said, making room on the rock. We're just sharing ghost stories. Suli settled between them, her slight frame radiating tension. I don't have ghosts, just empty spaces where they should be. Your husband, Jake asked. Ricardo wasn't cruel, just disappointed. We married when I was 16, full of dreams about children, family, belonging somewhere fully, instead of between worlds. She pulled her knees to her chest. Month after month, year after year, nothing. His mother said I was cursed for being half-blood. The medicine woman said my womb was cold. The priest said I hadn't prayed hard enough. That's foolish talk, Ayanna said firmly. Is it 5 years with Ricardo, 2 with Chief Nashota, 7 years and nothing, not even a miscarriage to mourn? Tears traced silver paths down her cheeks. Do you know what it's like to feel like your body has betrayed its most basic purpose, to watch other women bloom with life while you remain forever winter? Jake thought of Sarah pregnant and glowing and felt a stab of pain for this young woman who'd never experienced that joy. Maybe the purpose isn't what you thought it was. Maybe you're meant for something else. Like what? To be the barren second wife of a dying chief, to be passed along like an unwanted burden. To survive, Ayanna said sharply, to endure what would break others, to find strength in places others would only find despair. That's not nothing, Suli. Suli wiped her eyes. My mother, before she died, told me I had gifts, not the gift of life-bearing, but other gifts. I can read and write in 3 languages. I understand the healing plants of both Apache and Mexican traditions. I can navigate by the stars, calculate numbers in my head, remember every story I've ever heard. She laughed bitterly. Useless gifts for a woman whose value is measured in children. Not useless, Jake said quietly. Different. In the war, the most valuable soldiers weren't always the strongest or bravest. Sometimes they were the ones who could read maps, treat wounds, keep records, maintain morale. An army needs all kinds of soldiers. Is that what we are? Suli asked. An army. Maybe, Jake said, looking at both women. An army of the wounded fighting battles nobody else understands. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, the stars fading like dying embers. The camp would wake soon, and with it would come decisions that couldn't be unmade. But for now, the three of them sat together, strangers bound by loss, watching the desert transform from black to gray to gold. Chief Nashota is dying faster than he admits, Ayanna said suddenly. The medicine man says perhaps days, not weeks. If you're going to decide, Jake Hawkins, it needs to be soon. You could both leave, Jake suggested. Find other lives, other places. Where? Sully asked. Mexican society won't accept me without a husband or children. White society sees my Apache blood. Apache tradition says we belong to the tribe, but without Chief Nashota's protection, we become burdens or prizes for young warriors who don't want us. And there's more, Ayanna added reluctantly. The Indian agent Brewster has been making threats. He wants this land for a new mining operation. As long as Chief Nashota lived, he couldn't touch us. But after, he'll push you off the land, Jake finished. Unless we have legal protection. A white husband complicates his plans, makes it harder to simply relocate us. Jake stood, stretching muscles stiff from sitting. The sun was cresting the mountains, painting the desert in shades of fire. It reminded him of other sunrises before the war, when fire meant warmth and home instead of destruction and loss. My past isn't buried, he said finally. Those men in the canyon, they'll come back. Others too. I've made enemies, some deserved, some not. Being tied to me might be trading one danger for another. At least it would be a danger we choose, Ayanna said, standing as well. That's more freedom than we've had. Sully rose between them, smaller than both, but somehow containing a strength that belied her size. Chief Nashota says the eagle showed him 3 souls creating something new from broken pieces. Maybe the breaking was necessary. Maybe we had to be shattered to fit together in a new pattern. As they walked back toward the camp, now stirring with morning activity, Jake felt something shift inside him. Not healing. That would take more time than perhaps he had left in this world. But maybe a willingness to stop running from the ghosts and start walking with them instead. The past was written in scar tissue and ash, unchangeable as yesterday's weather. But the future, that was still unwritten, a blank page waiting for an unlikely story about 3 broken souls trying to build something whole in a land that broke everyone eventually. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The morning Chief Nashota died, eagles circled overhead in a pattern that made the elderly medicine man weep. Jake had been hauling water from the stream when Talon came running, his young face streaked with ceremonial paint, hastily applied. Father calls for you. Now, bring the women. Inside the chief's wickiup, the air hung thick with sacred smoke and the presence of approaching death. Nashota lay propped against buffalo robes, his breathing shallow, but his eyes blazing with final purpose. The medicine man, ancient even by Apache standards, crouched in the corner, chanting softly, his voice rising and falling like wind through canyon walls. Ayanna and Sully knelt on either side of their dying husband, their faces composed, but tears flowing freely. Jake stood awkwardly at the entrance until Nashota gestured him forward with trembling fingers. The eagles. The chief whispered, his voice barely audible. 7 of them, the sacred number. They bring message from the spirit world. He coughed, specks of blood staining his lips. Come closer, ghost soldier. There are things you must know. Jake knelt beside the dying man, close enough to smell the peculiar sweetness that clung to those preparing to cross over. He'd smelled it too many times on battlefields and field hospitals in the burned ruins of Georgia homes. The vision. Nashota continued gripping Jake's wrist with surprising strength. It was not complete before. The eagle showed me more last night. His eyes moved to each of them in turn. You 3 are not random. You are chosen. Chosen for what? Jake asked. to heal the wound between worlds, Apache and white, Mexican and American, past and future. The chief struggled to sit up straighter, aided by Talon. But first, you must know truth. Ayanna, tell him about the child. Ayanna's composure cracked slightly. Father, no, tell him. She took a shuddering breath, her dark eyes meeting Jake's. Thomas and I had a son, born after Thomas died. I gave him to the missionaries 6 months ago. The wickiup fell silent except for the medicine man's chanting and the crackle of the sacred fire. Jake felt the weight of this revelation settle over the space like a heavy blanket. Why? Suli asked, her voice small and wounded. Why didn't you tell us? Because shame is a poison that spreads, Ayanna said, her voice breaking. My son, little Thomas, he has his father's eyes, blue like winter sky. In our world, those eyes mark him as different, maybe cursed. In the white world, his skin marks him the same way. I thought the missionaries could give him a chance at belonging somewhere. You gave away your child. Jake couldn't hide his shock. I gave him a chance. Ayanna's control shattered completely. Do you know what it's like to look at your baby and see only the battles he'll have to fight? To know that keeping him means condemning him to be forever between worlds, never fully accepted by either. Jake thought of Emma, of Rose, of children who never got the chance to fight any battles at all. Where is he now? The mission school in Tucson, the Franciscans. They promised to educate him to find him a good family if I didn't come back for him within a year. She wiped her eyes roughly. It's been 6 months. Chief Nashoda's breathing grew more labored, but his eyes remained fierce. This is why the eagle chose you 3. Jake, you lost children. Ayanna, you gave 1 away. Suli, you cannot have them. Together, you have a chance to reclaim what was lost. It's not that simple, Jake protested. Nothing important ever is. The chief turned to Suli. Tell them your secret child, the one you've never spoken. Suli paled, her hands instinctively moving to her stomach. I was pregnant once, with Ricardo, 3 months along when I lost it. The bleeding was so bad, the medicine woman said. She said I might have damaged something inside. That's why nothing since then. You never told me, Ayanna said softly, reaching for the younger woman's hand. How could I? Everyone already thought I was cursed. If they knew I'd lost one. Suli's voice trailed off into silence. The medicine man's chanting grew louder, more urgent. Outside, the eagle's cries echoed across the camp. Chief Nashoda gathered his remaining strength, pulling something from beneath his blankets, a leather pouch decorated with beads and eagle feathers. This contains 3 items, he said, pressing the pouch into Jake's hands. A fragment of the true cross given to my grandfather by Spanish missionaries. A piece of turquoise from the sacred mountain, blessed by 40 generations of Apache holy men, and soil from the battlefield at Antietam, collected by Thomas himself. Jake felt the weight of the pouch heavier than its size suggested. Why are you giving me this? Because you will need all the protection the spirits can provide. What comes next will test you in ways war never did. The chief's voice was fading now, each word an effort. There is a man coming, Samuel Breslin. He owns the largest ranch in the territory and wants this land for his cattle empire. He has influence with the army, the Indian agency, everyone who matters. We know about Breslin, Ayanna said bitterly. He's the one who's been pushing for our relocation. He's more than that, Nashoda warned. He has plans for you, specifically Ayanna. He thinks an Apache widow with education would make an interesting addition to his household. And, Suli, he knows about your gift with languages. He needs translators for his Mexican land deals. He wants to own us. Suli breathed horror creeping into her voice. Unless you belong to someone else first, the chief said, his eyes fixed on Jake. A white husband complicates everything, makes you persons under law, not property to be claimed. Jake felt the familiar anger rising, the same rage that had sustained him through 4 years of war. No one owns these women. spoken like someone who doesn't understand how the world works for those without power. Nashota said gently, "But your anger is good. You will need it." He gestured weakly, and Talon brought forward a rolled document. "I have already drawn up the papers. Marriage certificate, Apache custom. The Indian agent witnessed it last week, thinking it was something else. He was drunk as usual." "You forged a marriage certificate," Jake was incredulous. "I created truth before its time," Nashota corrected. "Whether you sign it or not, the ceremony has been recorded, but without your consent, it means nothing." The eagles outside cried again, their calls seeming to shake the very air. The medicine man stopped chanting abruptly, his ancient eyes wide with something between fear and awe. "They come," he whispered. "The spirit warriors come for their chief." Nashota's body convulsed once, then stilled. His eyes remained open, but saw something beyond the confines of the wiki-up, beyond the physical world itself. When he spoke again, his voice was different, younger, stronger, echoing with otherworldly power. "Jake Hawkins," the voice that was and wasn't, Nashota intoned. "You who walks between life and death, carrying the weight of souls on your shoulders. The path ahead is marked with 3 trials. First, you must reclaim what was given away. Second, you must defend what others would take. Third, you must choose between vengeance and forgiveness. Fail any of these, and all is lost." The chief's body shuddered, and suddenly it was just Nashota again, old and dying, but smiling with profound peace. "The eagles have spoken. My ancestors wait for me." He looked at each of them one last time. "You 3 are my legacy now, not of blood, but of choice. That is stronger." With those words, Chief Nashota, leader of his people for 40 years, husband and protector, closed his eyes and breathed his last. The eagles outside screamed once in unison, then fell silent. The morning sun streaming through the smoke holes seemed to dim, as if the world itself mourned. Talon began the death chant, his young voice cracking with grief. Other voices joined from outside as word spread through the camp. But in the wiki-up, Jake, Ayanna, and Suli remained frozen in the moment, bound together by a dead man's vision and their own desperate needs. It was Ayanna who moved first, closing Nashota's eyes with gentle fingers. "He was a good man, better than this world deserved. He was the only father I truly knew," Suli added, her voice thick with tears. Jake looked at the marriage certificate in Talon's hands, then at the 2 women who were now, according to Apache law, and a forged document, his wives. The absurdity of it should have made him laugh or run. Instead, he found himself thinking of the eagles of prophecies, of the strange patterns that emerged from chaos. "We need to bury him first," Jake said finally. "Honor him properly, then we decide." "There's no time." Talon interrupted, tears streaming down his painted face. "Breslin's men were spotted at dawn riding this way with soldiers, at least 20 men. They'll be here before the sun reaches its peak." "Then we bury him now," Jake said firmly. "Quick but proper. He deserves that much." As they prepared Nashota's body for burial, wrapping him in his finest blankets, adorning him with his war honors, Jake found himself studying the 2 women who might become his responsibility. Ayanna worked with fierce efficiency, her grief channeled into action. Suli moved like a ghost there, but not entirely present, as if part of her had followed Nashota into the spirit world. The burial itself was swift but dignified. The entire camp gathered at the sacred ground where generations of chiefs lay buried. The medicine man spoke words in Apache that Jake didn't understand but felt in his bones. Words about courage, about bridges between worlds, about the endless cycle of death and rebirth that governed all things. As they placed Nashota in the ground facing east toward the rising sun, Jake noticed movement on the horizon. Dust clouds and the glint of metal. Breslin was coming, just as the chief had warned. "We need to go," Talon said urgently. "All of you, now." "Go where?" Suli asked. "To my ranch." Jake heard himself say the decision-making itself. It's not much, but it's defensible, and it's legally mine, which gives us standing. You're accepting? Ayanna asked, searching his face. Jake pulled out the marriage certificate, studying the careful forgery, the official seal that looked too real to be fake. I'm accepting that running won't solve anything. That maybe your chief was right about broken people building unbroken things. He looked at both women, but this has to be your choice too. Real choice, not desperation. Ayanna and Sully exchanged glances, an entire conversation in a single look. Then Ayanna spoke for both of them. We choose to try. That's all anyone can do. As Breslin's men crested the hill, their horses dark against the morning sky, Jake signed the certificate with steady hands. The ink was still wet when the first rifle shots echoed across the desert, warning shots meant to scatter the funeral gathering. But the Apache didn't scatter. They stood firm around their chief's grave, men, women, and children facing the approaching threat with the dignity of people who had endured worse and survived. And at their front stood an unlikely trio: a haunted Confederate soldier, an Apache widow, and a woman caught between two worlds, bound now by paper and circumstance, and perhaps something more. Samuel Breslin himself rode at the head of his column, a man who looked like prosperity itself. Silver hair, tailored clothes, even in the desert, the bearing of someone used to getting everything he wanted. His pale eyes fixed on Ayanna with an expression that made Jake's hand move instinctively to his gun. Well, well, Breslin called out as he reined in his horse just outside the sacred ground. I heard the old chief finally died. My condolences, of course, though perhaps it's for the best. Progress waits for no one, not even Apache chiefs. State your business and leave, Jake said, stepping forward. This is a funeral. Breslin's eyes narrowed, taking in Jake's presence with surprise and calculation. And who might you be? Jake Hawkins, the chief's son-in-law. He held up the certificate. Legally married under both Apache custom and territorial law, which makes these women under my protection. The silence that followed was deafening. Breslin's face cycled through surprise, anger, and finally a cold smile that promised trouble ahead. Is that so? Well, Mr. Hawkins, you've just made things very interesting. He touched the brim of his hat mockingly toward Ayanna and Sully. Ladies, we'll be seeing each other again soon, I'm sure. As Breslin and his men rode away, Jake felt the weight of what he'd just done settle fully on his shoulders. He'd signed his name to a dead man's vision, bound himself to two women he barely knew, and made an enemy of the most powerful man in the territory. But as he looked at Ayanna and Sully, saw the relief and determination in their faces, he thought maybe Chief Nashotah had been right. Maybe prophecies did come true, not because they were magic, but because sometimes desperate people chose to make them real. The sun climbed higher, and the eagles returned circling overhead like sentinels. Somewhere to the south, a mission school held a blue-eyed Apache boy who didn't know his world was about to change. Somewhere to the north, Jake's empty ranch waited to become something more than a monument to loneliness. And here, in this moment, three broken souls stood at the edge of something that might be disaster or might be redemption. Only time would tell which. The journey to Jake's ranch took 2 days through country that seemed determined to test their resolve. Desert gave way to scrubland, then to the grasslands where Jake had built his solitary existence. Ayanna rode like she was born to it, her back straight, despite exhaustion. Sully struggled, more unused to long hours in the saddle, but never complained, not even when Jake could see her wincing with each of Duchess's steps. They'd left the Apache camp with minimal ceremony but maximum urgency. Talon had pressed supplies into their hands, dried meat, water skins, ammunition Jake prayed they wouldn't need. The young warrior had gripped Jake's arm with fierce intensity. Take care of them, ghost soldier. They are all that remains of my father's heart. Now, as they crested the final ridge, Jake's ranch spread below them in the afternoon light, and he felt a twist of embarrassment at its modesty. The main cabin was solid but small, built for one man who didn't expect visitors. The barn needed repairs he'd been putting off. The corral fence had gaps a determined cow could walk through. "It's not much," he said apologetically. "It's shelter," Ayanna said simply. "And it's away from Breslin. That's enough." But Sully was smiling, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "There's water, a real creek, not just seasonal flow." Jake followed her gaze to Crystal Creek, the water that had made him choose this spot 3 years ago when he'd been looking for somewhere to disappear. The creek ran year-round, fed by mountain springs, creating a ribbon of green through the otherwise brown landscape. As they rode down, Jake noticed things through their eyes. The wild roses growing by the cabin door, the vegetable garden he'd half-heartedly maintained the view of distant mountains painted purple by approaching evening. Maybe it wasn't much, but it was his. Theirs now, he supposed. The inside of the cabin was worse than he'd remembered. Bachelor living had left its mark. Unwashed dishes, clothes draped over chairs, a layer of dust on everything except his guns, and the one photograph he kept wrapped in oilcloth. He rushed to clear a space, suddenly aware of how the place must smell to people used to the clean desert air. "I'll sleep in the barn," he said quickly. "You two can have the cabin." "That's foolish," Ayanna said, already rolling up her sleeves. "We're supposed to be married. Breslin will have spies. If you're sleeping in the barn, it tells everyone this arrangement isn't real." "But it isn't real," Jake pointed out. "It's as real as we make it," Sully said quietly, setting down her pack. "Chief Nashota said we were building something new. New things need new rules." They spent the remaining daylight making the place livable. Ayanna attacked the dishes with fierce efficiency, while Sully organized the chaos into something resembling order. Jake repaired the door that had been sticking, rehung the shutters properly, brought in fresh water. By nightfall, the cabin looked like a different place. Still modest, but clean, organized, almost homey. Dinner was an awkward affair. Jake had shot a rabbit that morning, and Ayanna had turned it into stew with wild onions and herbs she'd gathered along the trail. They ate in silence, the weight of their strange situation pressing down like summer heat. Finally, Sully spoke. "We need to establish how this will work. The practical matters." "Agreed," Ayanna said. "First, sleeping arrangements. This cabin is too small for false modesty. Jake, you take the bed. Sully and I will make pallets by the fire. I'm not taking the bed while you sleep on the floor." "Then we rotate," Sully suggested. "Or we expand. This cabin could support a second room. Apache women know construction." Jake thought of the lumber he'd been saving to repair the barn. "I suppose we could build an addition." "Good. What else?" Ayanna was in planning mode, now the same focus she'd shown preparing Nashota for burial. "Money," Jake said bluntly. "I have some saved, but not enough for 3 people long term. I'll need to sell some cattle, maybe hire out for ranch work." "I can contribute," Sully said unexpectedly. She pulled a small leather pouch from her bag, spilling its contents on the table. Gold coins gleamed in the lamplight. "My dowry from the first marriage. Ricardo never knew I kept it." Jake counted quickly. This is enough for months of supplies. "And I have these," Ayanna added, removing her silver hair ornaments. "Apache silverwork. Traders in Tucson will pay well." "I can't take your jewelry." "You're not taking. We're pooling resources. Like a military unit shares supplies." Ayanna's comparison was deliberate, speaking to the soldier in him. They talked late into the night, planning with the intensity of people who knew their survival depended on details. Who would go to town for supplies, Jake always armed, how they would handle visitors, united front. No contradictions. What story they would tell, meeting at the camp, quick courtship, Apache ceremony blessed by dying chief. Enough truth to be believable. But as the fire died to embers, the practical gave way to the personal. "Little Thomas," Jake said suddenly. "Your son. We need to get him back." Ayanna stiffened. "That's not your responsibility." "Isn't it? If we're doing this, really doing this, then your son is part of it. You can't build a new family while half your heart is in Tucson. The missionaries won't just give him back. They'll say I abandoned him, that I'm an unfit mother, and now that I'm married to a white man, they'll think She couldn't finish the sentence. They'll think you're a woman who did whatever necessary to protect her child, Sully said firmly, just as you're doing now. Jake stood pacing the small space. I know the Franciscans. Supplied them with beef twice when I first arrived. Brother Francis, the one in charge, he's strict but fair. If we approach this right, you'd claim him. Ayana's voice was barely a whisper. A half Apache child with blue eyes who'll never fully belong anywhere. Jake thought of Emma, of rows, of empty arms, and silent nurseries. Every child deserves to belong somewhere. Maybe that somewhere is with 3 people who understand not belonging. Sully had been quiet, but now she spoke with unexpected passion. I could teach him, reading, writing, numbers, languages, give him tools to navigate both worlds. And I could teach him Apache ways. Ayana added hope creeping into her voice. Hunting, tracking the stories of his people. And I'll teach him to shoot straight and think straighter, Jake finished. Between the 3 of us, maybe we can raise a boy who doesn't have to choose between worlds, but can walk freely in both. The decision seemed to crystallize something between them. Not love. That was too much to expect from 3 damaged strangers. But purpose, perhaps. A reason to make this bizarre arrangement work. That night, Jake did take the bed at their insistence, but sleep eluded him. He could hear the women whispering by the fire, their voices mixing with the crack of settling logs and the distant howl of coyotes. They were planning, he realized. Making lists, discussing possibilities, building dreams on the fragile foundation of a forged certificate and dead man's prophecy. The next morning brought the first test of their arrangement. Jake woke to find breakfast ready, cornbread and coffee, simple but filling. Ayana was already outside examining the garden with a critical eye. Sully sat at the table writing in a journal with neat, precise script. Making plans, he asked, pouring coffee. Making a budget. If we're careful between your savings and my dowry, we can last 4 months without selling anything. That gives us time to establish ourselves, maybe expand the garden, increase the cattle herd. You understand numbers that well. She gave him a look that managed to be both sad and amused. When you can't have children, you find other things to occupy your mind. I kept Ricardo's books for years, though he never knew it. Outside, Ayana called out, "Riders coming, 3 men." Jake was out the door in seconds, rifle in hand. But as the riders approached, he recognized the lead figure, Tom Martinez, owner of the neighboring ranch, a fair man who'd helped Jake learn the area when he first arrived. "Jake," Tom called out, reining in outside the cabin. "Heard you got married. Came to offer congratulations and see if you need anything." The 2 men with him Jake knew less well. Cowboys from Tom's spread their faces curious, but not hostile. Yet, Tom. Jake nodded, not lowering the rifle entirely. News travels fast. Faster when Samuel Breslin's spreading it. Says you married 2 Apache women to spite him. That true? Before Jake could answer, Ayana emerged from the cabin, dignified and calm. Sully followed, and Jake saw Tom's eyes widen at the sight of them. 2 beautiful women, clearly native, but carrying themselves with educated grace. "I married them because it was right," Jake said simply. Chief Nashota was dying. These were his wishes. Tom dismounted, slowly removing his hat. Ma'am. He nodded to each woman. "Tom Martinez. I own the Double Bar Ranch to the south." Ayana Hawkins. Ayana said the new surname strange on her tongue. "This is Sully Hawkins. Thank you for your welcome." Tom's weathered face creased into a smile. "Well, I'll be. You speak better English than half my cowboys." He turned to Jake. "Breslin's stirring up trouble in town. Says this marriage isn't legal, that you're harboring Apache raiders, all sorts of nonsense. And what do people think? Split down the middle. Half think you've lost your mind. Other half remember you've been straight with everyone since you arrived. Helped Ben Cooper when his barn burned, found Mary Watson's boy when he got lost in that snowstorm. Tom shrugged. You've got credit built up. Question is whether it's enough. What would help? Sully asked, surprising everyone with her directness. Tom considered. Normalcy. Come to town for supplies like any other family. Attend the harvest dance next month. Let people see you're not hiding anything. He paused. And maybe consider the church. Reverend Mills is a good man, doesn't care about skin color as much as soul color, if you take my meaning. A Christian marriage to back up the Apache one, Jake mused. That's not a bad idea. It's protection, Tom agreed. Breslin can challenge Apache customs, but a Christian marriage in the territorial church, that's ironclad. After Tom and his men left, promising to spread word that Jake's new family was respectable, the three sat around the table considering this new development. I was baptized Christian by the missionaries, Sully offered. It wouldn't be strange for me. Thomas was Christian too, Ayanna added. He said his God and our spirits weren't so different. Both wanted people to take care of each other. But a church wedding means the whole town watching, Jake pointed out. Everyone judging, whispering. Let them whisper, Ayanna said with sudden fierceness. We've all been whispered about before. At least this time we'll be together when it happens. The word together hung in the air like a promise or a prayer. Jake realized that somewhere in the last 2 days, he'd stopped thinking of this as a temporary arrangement, a favor to a dying chief. These women were becoming real to him. Ayanna, with her fierce dignity and hidden pain, Sully with her quiet intelligence and deep sorrow. There's something else, he said, pulling out the leather pouch Nashota had given him. The chief said we'd need protection. Maybe we should each carry part of this. He divided the contents, giving Ayanna the turquoise from the sacred mountain Sully, the fragment of the true cross, keeping the Antietam soil for himself. Each item carried weight beyond its physical presence, connecting them to something larger than their individual losses. For protection, Ayanna said, tucking the turquoise into a small bag around her neck. For faith, Sully added, doing the same with the cross fragment. For remembrance, Jake finished pocketing the soil from the battlefield where everything had started, where his single act of mercy had rippled out to bring them all here. That night, they reorganized the sleeping arrangements again. Jake insisted on taking the floor, but they ended up with all 3 bedrolls near the fire, close enough for warmth, but with respectful distance. As the fire crackled and the night sounds of the ranch settled around them, Jake heard Sully singing softly in Spanish, a lullaby, perhaps, or a prayer. Ayanna joined in with harmonies in Apache, their voices weaving together like braided sweetgrass. Jake closed his eyes and for the first time in years didn't see flames when he did. Instead, he saw possibilities, a ranch expanded with new rooms, a garden green with vegetables, a blue-eyed Apache boy running through fields of grass, 3 broken people slowly mending each other's cracks with patience and purpose. It wasn't love yet. It might never be the kind of love he'd had with Sarah, but it was something, a foundation, a beginning. And for the first time since he'd walked away from the ashes of his former life, Jake Hawkins thought maybe, just maybe, he wanted to stay and see what they could build. The sound of hammering woke Jake before dawn, which was unusual because he was typically the first one up. He found Ayanna on the roof of the cabin, already having patched 2 holes he'd been meaning to fix for months. "Where did you learn roofing?" he called up. "Apache women build the homes," she replied, not pausing in her work. "Men hunt, women build. That's why our structures last." It had been 3 weeks since they'd arrived at the ranch, and the transformation was remarkable. What had been a bachelor's bare existence was becoming something that looked suspiciously like a home. Suli had turned the neglected garden into neat rows of vegetables using an irrigation system she'd designed that combined Apache water preservation techniques with Mexican farming methods. Ayanna had repaired not just the roof, but the barn doors, the corral fence, and somehow made Jake's ancient plow functional again. "We need more nails," Ayanna said, climbing down with an agility that made Jake nervous. "And flour. Coffee, too." "I'll go to town this afternoon," Jake said, then hesitated. "Maybe you should come. Tom Martinez was right. People need to see us being normal." Ayanna's face tightened. "Your normal or mine." It was a fair point. In the 3 weeks they'd been together, Jake had gone to town twice alone, each time returning with stories of stares and whispers, questions he'd deflected, and comments he'd ignored. But hiding the women away only fed the rumors. "Our normal," he said finally. "Whatever that looks like." Suli emerged from the cabin, flour in her hair from morning baking. "If we're going to town, we should all go. United front, like we discussed." The decision made, they prepared carefully. Ayanna traded her traditional dress for a simple calico that had belonged to Jake's mother, kept in a trunk he hadn't opened in years. Suli was already dressed in the Mexican-style clothing she favored. Jake put on his cleanest shirt, trying to look respectable rather than dangerous. The ride to town took 2 hours, during which they rehearsed their story one more time. Met at the Apache camp when Jake was trading horses. Courtship blessed by Chief Nashota. Marriage according to Apache custom-seeking Christian blessing now. Simple, believable enough truth to withstand scrutiny. Willow Creek wasn't much of a town. One main street, a general store, saloon, church, schoolhouse, and assorted businesses scratching out existence from the desert. But as they rode in, Jake felt like they were entering a coliseum. Every eye turned their way. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A child pointed until his mother slapped his hand down. "Steady," Jake murmured as much to himself as to the women. They hitched their horses outside Morrison's general store. Jake had specifically chosen it because Tom Martinez's brother owned it, hoping for a friendlier reception. Inside, Mrs. Morrison, a stout woman with kind eyes, looked up from her ledger. "Mr. Hawkins," she said carefully, then with visible effort. "Mrs. Hawkins." And Mrs. Hawkins. The absurdity of it almost made Jake laugh. 2 Mrs. Hawkins. The town would have to figure out how to handle that. "We need supplies," Suli said, stepping forward with quiet dignity. "Flour, coffee, nails, and—" She glanced at the shelves. "Do you have any slate boards? For writing?" Writing. Mrs. Morrison's curiosity overcame her caution. "I'm teaching letters and numbers. My husband wants to improve his accounting." The lie came smoothly, but Jake played along, looking appropriately sheepish. "Never was good with figures," he admitted. As they gathered supplies, other customers entered the store. Each time the same sequence: surprise, staring, whispering. But Ayanna and Suli maintained perfect composure, discussing fabric for curtains, comparing prices on seed potatoes, acting like any ranch wives would. Then Samuel Breslin walked in. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Breslin was dressed as always like a man who'd never worked a day in his life. His silver hair, pomaded boots, polished to mirror shine. 2 of his men flanked him, hands resting on their guns. "Well, well, the happy family." His voice dripped condescension. "How domestic." "Mr. Breslin." Jake nodded, keeping his own hand casual but ready. Breslin ignored him, focusing on Ayanna. "You know, I had an interesting conversation with the Indian agent yesterday. Brewster says there's no record of your marriage in the official files, just a suspicious document that appeared after Nashota died. The marriage is recognized by the Apache," Ayanna said evenly. "That's all that matters to us." "Is it because Apache law doesn't hold much water in American courts? And there are questions about property rights inheritance, whether Mr. Hawkins here has legal authority over his wives." He savored the last word like wine. "Actually," A new voice interrupted. "I believe I can help with that." Everyone turned to see Reverend Mills standing in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the light. The Presbyterian minister was young for his position, maybe 35, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Reverend Breslin said coldly, "This doesn't concern the church." "Marriage always concerns the church, Mr. Breslin. And I've been meaning to visit Mr. Hawkins about blessing his union properly. In fact, he pulled out a pocket calendar. I have an opening this Sunday, after regular service. Would that suit you, Mr. Hawkins, ladies?" Jake felt Sully's hand brush his. A signal. "That would suit us fine, Reverend." "Excellent. We'll make it a proper celebration. Mrs. Mills will be delighted to help with preparations." The Reverend's smile was benign, but his eyes were steel when they met Breslin's. After all, what God joins together, let no man put asunder. Isn't that right, Mr. Breslin? The rancher's face flushed red, but he couldn't argue with Scripture in front of witnesses. He turned on his heel and stalked out, his men following. After he left, the tension in the store eased slightly. Mrs. Morrison actually smiled. "Will you need fabric for wedding dresses? I have some lovely blue cotton that just came in." The ride home was quiet until they were well out of town. Then Sully started laughing, not bitter laughter, but genuine mirth. Did you see his face when the Reverend quoted Scripture like he'd swallowed a scorpion? Even Ayanna smiled. The Reverend is clever. A church wedding makes it much harder for Breslin to challenge us legally. Why would he help us? Jake wondered aloud. Maybe because it's right, Sully suggested. Sometimes people do things just because they're right. Back at the ranch, they found an unexpected gift. Tom Martinez had sent over 2 of his hands with a delivery of lumber. "Boss says you're building an addition," one of the cowboys said, clearly curious about the domestic arrangements. "Figured you could use this. Wedding present," he said. The lumber was good quality enough for 2 rooms. Jake tried to calculate what he owed Tom, but the cowboys waved him off. "Boss says you helped him enough times. Besides," the younger one grinned, "he's betting on you against Breslin. Lots of folks are." After they left, the 3 stood looking at the lumber, each seeing different possibilities. "A room for little Thomas," Ayanna said softly, "when we get him back." "A workshop," Sully added, "for sewing, writing, maybe teaching other children eventually." "A real kitchen," Jake contributed, "with a proper stove, not just the fireplace." They worked until sunset, Jake and Ayanna cutting and measuring, while Sully kept them supplied with water and held boards in place. As they worked, they talked, not about the big things, but the small ones. Sully told stories of her grandmother, a curandera, who knew every healing plant in the Sonoran Desert. Ayanna described the games Apache children played, how they learned to move silently before they could properly walk. Jake found himself sharing memories of learning carpentry from his father, building a treehouse for Emma that lasted exactly 1 storm before collapsing. That night, exhausted from the day's labor, they ate dinner, mostly in comfortable silence. The addition was framed out, ready for walls. Tomorrow they'd start on the actual construction. "We need to talk about Sunday," Jake said eventually. "The wedding." "What about it?" Ayanna asked. "Well, it's a Christian ceremony. There'll be vows, promises before God and everyone." "Are you saying you can't make those promises?" Sully's voice was carefully neutral. Jake struggled to find the right words. "I'm saying that promising to love and cherish feels like lying when we barely know each other, when this arrangement is about survival more than affection." Ayanna set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "Do you think love was what I felt for Thomas when we first married? I agreed because my father approved, and Thomas seemed kind. Love came later, built day by day, through small kindnesses and shared struggles." "My first marriage was arranged when I was 15, Sully added. "I met Ricardo 3 times before our wedding. We never loved each other, but we learned to live together peacefully. That's more than many have." So we promise what we can honestly promise, Jake suggested. Protection, respect, partnership, building something together. Let the rest come if it will. The Reverend will want traditional vows, Ayanna pointed out. Then we say them and mean what we can mean, Sully said pragmatically. Words are just sounds. Intent is what matters. They were interrupted by the sound of horses approaching fast. Jake grabbed his rifle but relaxed when he recognized Talon's voice calling out in Apache. The young warrior dismounted dusty and exhausted from hard riding. Breslin, he gasped, accepting water from Sully. He came to the reservation with soldiers, trying to force people to sign papers giving up water rights. The elders are resisting, but he shook his head. He says if the Apache won't negotiate with him, he'll negotiate with their white spokesman, you. I don't speak for the Apache, Jake protested. You married the chief's widows. In Breslin's eyes and the law's eyes, that makes you responsible for their interests, including their claim to reservation resources. The implications hit Jake like cold water. This wasn't just about protecting two women anymore. Breslin was using their marriage as a way to challenge Apache sovereignty itself. What do the elders want me to do? Stand firm, don't sign anything. The Reverend's wedding gives you legal standing. Breslin can't easily challenge. But after that, Talon paused. After that, he'll try other methods. You mean violence? I mean, he's already hired guns from Texas. Men with reputations, the kind who make problems disappear. After Talon left, promising to return with news from the reservation, the three sat around the dying fire, digesting this new threat. The peaceful evening of building and planning felt like a dream already fading. We could leave, Jake offered. Head to California, Oregon, somewhere Breslin can't reach. And abandon my son. Ayanna's voice was sharp. Abandon our people to Breslin's greed. Running doesn't solve anything, Sully agreed. It just moves the problem to someone else's doorstep. Jake knew they were right, but the soldier in him was calculating odds, and they weren't good. 3 people against Breslin's money and influence his hired guns, his connection to corrupt officials. Then we make the ranch defensible, he said finally. And we make allies. Tom Martinez is already on our side. The Reverend too. There must be others who dislike Breslin's methods. The Mexican families in the valley, Sully suggested. Breslin's been squeezing them for years. They might welcome an alternative. Some of the younger Apache warriors would help, Ayanna added. Those who respected Nashotah and resent Breslin's pressure. They planned late into the night again. But this time their plans were strategic rather than domestic. Where to position lookouts, how to fortify the cabin, which neighbors might provide support or at least warning. It was a different kind of home building, but perhaps just as necessary. When they finally bedded down, Jake noticed the sleeping arrangements had shifted slightly. Still 3 separate bedrolls, but closer now within arm's reach. As if proximity might provide protection against what was coming. Just before dawn, Jake woke to find Ayanna sitting by the window, keeping watch with his rifle across her lap. My turn, he said, moving to take the weapon. She held on to it for a moment. This is my fight too now. Our fight. I know. That's what worries me. Don't, she said firmly. We're stronger together than apart. Nashotah knew that. It's why he chose you, not to save us, but to stand with us. As the sun rose, painting the mountains pink and gold, Jake watched Ayanna return to her bedroll, watched Sully stir and stretch, and felt something shift in his chest. Not love, not yet, but something that might grow into it, given time and cultivation like Sully's garden. They had 4 days until the church wedding. 4 days to turn a ranch into a fortress, and an arrangement into something real enough to withstand whatever Breslin threw at them. 4 days to become the family they were pretending to be. Jake picked up a hammer and headed for the addition. Building was better than worrying. Each nail driven was a statement of permanence, a declaration that they weren't going anywhere. Let Breslin come. They'd be ready. As he worked, he heard Suli singing in the kitchen, smell fresh bread baking. Ayanna was in the garden harvesting the first vegetables of their shared labor. It was domestic and dangerous, peaceful and precarious, all at once. Home, Jake said to himself, testing the word. It didn't fit yet, not quite, but like the addition growing wall by wall, it was taking shape. And maybe despite everything, or because of it, that would be enough. The sound of hammering echoed across Crystal Creek, a rhythm of resistance and hope combined. 3 broken people building something unbroken, one board, one nail, one day at a time. The first harvest of their strange union was still growing, but already Jake could taste something sweet beneath the bitter, the possibility of belonging, of family, of home. And in 4 days before God and the town of Willow Creek, they would make it official. Let Breslin try to tear down what they were building. Some things once properly constructed could weather any storm. Sunday morning arrived with unseasonable rain, turning the desert into a carpet of sudden wildflowers. Jake stood in the cabin adjusting his collar for the 10th time, while Suli tried to tame his hair with pomade and patience. "Stop fidgeting," she commanded, but her hands were gentle. "You've faced Confederate charges and Apache raiders. Surely you can handle a church full of townspeople." Those were simpler. I knew who was enemy and who was friend. Ayanna emerged from behind the blanket they'd hung for privacy, wearing the blue cotton dress Mrs. Morrison had insisted on gifting them. She looked uncomfortable but determined, like a warrior in unfamiliar armor. Today, everyone is both until proven otherwise. They'd spent the previous days in a whirlwind of preparation. The addition was now fully enclosed, if not finished, the ranch fortified with subtle defensive positions, and they'd practiced their story until even they almost believed it. But now, facing the reality of standing before the town and God to make promises they weren't sure they could keep, doubt crept in like morning mist. A knock interrupted Jake's brooding. Tom Martinez stood at the door with his wife Mary, a plump woman with laugh lines and knowing eyes. "Came to escort you," Tom said. "Figured you might appreciate friendly faces in the crowd." "And I brought something borrowed," Mary added, producing a delicate silver chain with a small cross. "For the brides. Every woman needs something borrowed on her wedding day." Suli's eyes welled up as Mary fastened it around her neck. It was such a simple gesture, but it represented acceptance, normalcy, belonging. Ayanna allowed Mary to pin a matching one to her dress, though Jake could see her fighting not to reach for the turquoise hidden beneath. The ride to town was surreal. Other families joined them along the way, some curious, some supportive, all wanting to witness this unusual union. By the time they reached the church, it seemed half the territory had gathered. Jake spotted Breslin's men lounging against the saloon, watching with predatory interest, but Breslin himself was notably absent. Reverend Mills met them at the church door, his expression warm but serious. "Before we begin, I need to ask, are you all entering this union freely? No coercion." Freely, all 3 answered, and Jake was surprised to realize he meant it. The church was packed. Jake recognized some faces, customers from his cattle sales neighbors he'd helped, travelers he'd shared water with. But there were surprises too. A delegation of Apache warriors sat in the back, led by Talon. Several Mexican families occupied the middle pews, including the Hernandez clan, whose well he'd helped dig last winter. Even the schoolmar Miss Patterson, a notorious gossip who usually disapproved of everything, sat primly in the 3rd row. The ceremony itself was a blur. Jake stood at the altar with Reverend Mills while Ayanna and Suli walked up the aisle together, having refused to choose who would go first. The Reverend, adaptable to the unusual situation, modified the traditional vows. "Do you, Jake Hawkins, take these women as your lawfully wedded wives to protect and provide for, to respect and cherish, in sickness and in health, for as long as you all shall live, "I do." The words came out stronger than Jake expected. "Do you, Ayanna and Suli, take this man as your lawfully wedded husband to support and stand beside to respect and cherish in sickness and in health for as long as you all shall live?" "We do," they said in unison, their voices harmonizing in a way that sent whispers through the congregation. "Then, by the power vested in me by God and the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wives. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The kiss was awkward, a brief brush of lips on each woman's cheek that satisfied propriety while maintaining dignity. But as they turned to face the congregation, Jake caught something in both women's eyes that hadn't been there before. Not love, but possibility. The reception was held in the churchyard, tables groaning under food that had appeared from nowhere. It seemed every family had brought something: Mexican tamales, Apache fry bread, American apple pie. It was a mixture as unusual as the marriage itself, but somehow it worked. Jake was accepting congratulations from Tom Martinez when a commotion arose near the road. A carriage had arrived, expensive and out of place in the frontier town. From it stepped a woman in traveling clothes, holding the hand of a small boy. The boy had skin burnished by sun and heritage black hair that caught the light and eyes the color of winter sky. Little Thomas. Ayanna breathed, and before anyone could react, she was running. The woman from the carriage, clearly from the mission given her modest dress and wooden cross, looked startled as Ayanna dropped to her knees before the boy, tears streaming down her face. The child, perhaps 4 years old, studied her with those startling blue eyes. "Mama," he said uncertainly, and the word broke something in Ayanna that Jake could almost hear shatter. Jake and Suli reached them as the mission woman was speaking. The brothers felt it was best to return him. A generous donation was made to the mission, along with legal papers asserting parental rights. She looked pointedly at Jake. "Your lawyer was very persuasive." "My lawyer?" Jake was baffled. A familiar voice answered from behind. "That would be me." Everyone turned to find Samuel Breslin standing there, dressed impeccably, as always his expression unreadable. "What game are you playing?" Jake demanded instinctively, moving to shield Ayanna and the boy. "No game, Mr. Hawkins. A business proposition. You see, I've been thinking about our situation. You have something I want: influence with the Apache and connections to the Mexican community. I have something you want. Well, I had something: the boy. Now we're even, and we can discuss future arrangements like civilized men." "You bought my son to use as leverage." Ayanna's voice was dangerous. "I reunited a mother and child as a wedding gift," Breslin corrected smoothly. "The fact that it might lead to mutually beneficial arrangements is simply good business." Jake felt rage building, but Suli's hand on his arm stopped him. She stepped forward, her usual quiet demeanor replaced by something harder. "Mr. Breslin, you've made a miscalculation." "Have I?" "You think returning little Thomas gives you leverage. Instead, you've shown everyone here that you see children as commodities. The Apache," she gestured to Talon and his warriors, "consider children sacred. The Mexican families value nothing more than family bonds. And the Americans, well, they might overlook many sins, but using a child as a bargaining chip," she shook her head. "You've just lost more support than you've gained." The crowd had grown quiet, everyone listening. Breslin's confident expression faltered slightly as he noticed the hard looks from previously neutral townspeople. Reverend Mills stepped forward. "Mr. Breslin, while the reunion of this family is indeed Christian charity, I trust you'll expect no earthly reward for doing what's right." Trapped by his own gesture and the Reverend's words, Breslin could only nod stiffly. "Of course not, Reverend. As I said, a wedding gift." He touched his hat mockingly to Jake. "Enjoy your expanded family, Mr. Hawkins. I'm sure we'll speak again soon." As Breslin departed, the tension eased. Little Thomas was passed around like a small miracle, the Apache warriors offering him blessing, touches the Mexican women cooing over him, even stern Miss Patterson declaring him surprisingly well-mannered for a half-breed, which was probably the closest to a compliment she could manage. But it was the moment when Jake held him that everything changed. The boy studied Jake with those impossible blue eyes, so like his father's, yet set in his mother's face. "Are you my new papa?" he asked in careful English. Jake looked at Ayanna, who was watching with held breath at Sully, whose face showed naked longing for the child she'd never have, and made a decision that had nothing to do with arrangements or survival. "If you'll have me," he said. Little Thomas considered this seriously, then nodded. "Mama says you're brave. The sisters at the mission said brave men make good papas." "Not always," Jake said honestly, "but I'll try." The boy seemed satisfied with this and promptly fell asleep in Jake's arms, exhausted from the journey and excitement. As Jake stood there holding this unexpected gift, he felt something fundamental shift. This wasn't just about protecting two women anymore. This was about family, real family, messy and complicated, and absolutely worth defending. The reception continued into the afternoon. Jake noticed things he'd missed before, how the Apache warriors gradually mixed with the townspeople, how Mexican families shared tables with American ranchers, how his strange marriage had somehow become a bridge between communities that rarely mingled. "You've started something," Tom Martinez observed, joining Jake where he stood watching Sully teach Mexican children a clapping game, while Ayanna showed Apache weaving to a group of town women. Breslin ruled through division, kept everyone separate suspicious. But this, he gestured at the mixed gathering, this is dangerous to men like him. It wasn't intentional. The best revolutions never are. As the sun began to sink, families started departing. Many stopped to offer not just congratulations, but concrete support. The Hernandez patriarch promised to send his sons to help finish the addition. Mrs. Morrison organized a schedule for women to visit Sully and Ayanna to help them adjust to frontier life, though Jake suspected it was as much about community building as assistance. Talon approached last, his warriors behind him. "The elders have decided. The water rights remain with the Apache, but we will share with those who respect the land and its people." He looked meaningfully at Jake. "Your ranch has first claim after our needs are met." "That's generous, but it's practical. Breslin owns the judges, but he doesn't own the water. Not if we say he doesn't." Talon smiled, suddenly looking his young age. "Besides, my father's spirit rests easier knowing his family is protected." As they finally headed home, little Thomas asleep in Ayanna's arms, Jake drove the wagon in contemplative silence. The ranch looked different in the evening light, larger, somehow more substantial. The addition they'd built stood proud against the older structure, a physical reminder that things could change, grow, improve. That night, arranging sleeping spaces was complicated by a small boy who refused to let go of his mother. They ended up with all the bedrolls in the main room again. Little Thomas between Ayanna and Sully Jake, keeping watch by the door. But sometime in the night, the boy crawled over to Jake, curling against his side with the trust only children possess. "Papa scared away monsters," he mumbled sleepily. Jake, who hadn't been called Papa in 5 years, felt his throat close. He looked over to find both women awake watching. In the dim firelight, he saw Ayanna's grateful tears, Sully's soft smile, and realized this was how families were really made, not through blood or vows, but through choosing each other again and again in small moments like this. The next morning brought new challenges. Little Thomas, it turned out, was energetic, curious, and had opinions about everything. He didn't like eggs. They were slimy. Thought Jake's horse was scary, too tall, and insisted on helping with chores in ways that tripled the time they took. But he also brought laughter. Real, unforced laughter that Jake hadn't heard from any of them before. When the boy tried to milk the cow and ended up covered in more milk than he collected, even Ayanna's usual dignity cracked. When he solemnly informed Suli that her tortillas were almost as good as Sister Maria's, but not quite, her mock outrage had them all giggling. "We need to think about his education," Suli said that evening, after the boy had finally exhausted himself into sleep. "He's bright. He already knows some letters, some numbers." "The town school won't take him," Ayanna said flatly. "Half-breed children aren't welcome." "Then we teach him ourselves," Jake said. "You both have education. And maybe we start a school here for all the children who don't fit in town." "That's ambitious," Suli said, but her eyes were bright with possibility. "So was marrying 2 women and claiming their son," Jake pointed out. "Might as well keep being ambitious." They were interrupted by hoofbeats approaching fast. Jake grabbed his rifle but relaxed when he recognized the rider, one of Tom Martinez's hands. "Mr. Hawkins, Tom sent me. Breslin's making his move. He's got a judge coming from Tucson tomorrow. Plans to challenge your marriage, say it's not legal that the boy should be made a ward of the court." "On what grounds?" Ayanna demanded. "Says no man can legally have 2 wives. That it's bigamy, immoral, that you're unfit parents." The hand looked embarrassed to be repeating it. "Tom says to come to his place tonight. He's gathering folks to stand with you." After the messenger left, they sat in stunned silence. They'd known Breslin wouldn't give up, but this was faster than expected. "We could run," Jake offered again, though his heart wasn't in it. "No," Ayanna said firmly. "I spent 6 months without my son. I won't lose him again. And I won't be driven from the first real home I've ever had," Suli added. Jake looked at these 2 remarkable women, at the sleeping boy, who'd already claimed a piece of his heart, at the home they'd built together in just a few weeks. "Then we fight, not with guns, but with law, with community, with the truth of what we're building here." That night, they prepared for battle of a different sort. Suli documented everything: the Apache marriage certificate, the Christian wedding, the mission's return of little Thomas. Ayanna reached out to the Apache elders, securing their formal recognition of the marriage. Jake rode to Tom's ranch, where he found not just Tom, but a dozen other ranchers and farmers, all tired of Breslin's dominance. "We've been waiting for someone to stand up to him," Tom explained. "You just became that someone." The irony wasn't lost on Jake. He'd come to this territory to disappear, to nurse his wounds in solitude. Instead, he'd become the center of a community's resistance, the unlikely champion of a cause he hadn't sought. When he returned near dawn, he found Ayanna and Suli still awake, teaching little Thomas a song in Apache. The boy's voice, high and sweet, mixing Apache words with English in the charming way of children who don't yet know languages are supposed to be separate. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Jake said, joining them by the fire, "I want you to know I'm grateful for this, for all of it." "Don't talk like we're losing," Ayanna said fiercely. "I'm not. I'm talking like we've already won something. Maybe not the fight with Breslin, but something else. Something more important." Suli reached over and took his hand, then Ayanna's, creating a circle with little Thomas in the middle. "Family," she said simply. "Family," they agreed, and the word felt like a vow more binding than any they'd spoken in church. Tomorrow would bring judges and challenges Breslin's money against their makeshift alliance. But tonight, in their half-built home by Crystal Creek, they were complete. A soldier, a widow, a woman between worlds, and a boy with sky-blue eyes. An impossible family in an impossible situation, making it possible through sheer determination and unexpected love. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but Jake thought he heard something in the wind. Maybe Nashoda's spirit, maybe just wishful thinking. That sounded like approval. They'd honored his vision, created something from broken pieces. Now they just had to keep it whole. The judge arrived from Tucson in a black carriage that looked like a hearse against the morning sky. Judge Cornelius Blackwood had a reputation. He could be bought, sold, and rented by the hour if the price was right. Breslin had clearly paid premium rates. The hearing was held in the town hall, which doubled as a courtroom when needed. By 9 o'clock, it was packed to overflowing. Jake sat at a table with Ayanna Sully and Little Thomas, who insisted on wearing his best shirt and sitting like a big boy. Across from them, Breslin lounged with practiced confidence beside a weasel-faced lawyer from Tucson. This hearing will determine the legal status of this arrangement, Judge Blackwood began, his voice dripping disdain, and the welfare of the minor child. The lawyer stood buttoning his expensive coat. Your Honor, we contend that this marriage is not only illegal, but immoral. No man can have two wives under territorial law. Furthermore, placing a child in such an environment constitutes endangerment. That's a lie. Little Thomas piped up, causing a ripple of laughter through the crowd. Silence the child, the judge ordered, but Jake noticed even he seemed slightly charmed by the boy's fierce loyalty. Reverend Mills stood from the gallery. Your Honor, I performed a Christian ceremony. In the eyes of God, God's eyes aren't recognized by territorial law. The lawyer interrupted smoothly. The fact remains, bigamy is illegal. Actually, a new voice spoke from the back. That's not entirely accurate. Everyone turned as an elderly man in a travel-worn suit made his way forward. He had the bearing of someone used to authority and the sharp eyes of someone who missed nothing. And you are? Judge Blackwood asked irritably. Judge Theodore Mason, retired, formerly of the Territorial Supreme Court. He produced documents from his briefcase. I've been researching this case since Reverend Mills contacted me. Breslin's confidence visibly shook. This wasn't part of his plan. Judge Mason continued, the marriage was first performed under Apache law, which the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo requires us to respect for indigenous peoples. The Christian ceremony was a blessing, not a second marriage. Furthermore, he pulled out more papers. I have here precedents from Mormon settlements in Utah, where plural marriage, while discouraged, has not resulted in the removal of children from their homes. This is irregular, Blackwood spluttered. What's irregular, Judge Mason said sternly, is a judge traveling 2 days to hear a family dispute that should have been handled locally, unless, of course, there were other motivations. The crowd murmured. Breslin's jaw tightened, but it was Sully who delivered the killing blow. She stood, her usual quietness replaced by courtroom command. Your Honor, I have here documents showing that Mr. Breslin has attempted to acquire our land through various means, all of which failed. This hearing is his latest attempt. She produced a folder. These are offers he made, threats when we refused, and sworn statements from witnesses who heard him say he'd get that Apache water one way or another. Where did you get those? Breslin snarled. Your former bookkeeper, Mr. Santos. He was quite helpful after you fired him for refusing to forge documents. The courtroom erupted. Judge Blackwood hammered for order, but the damage was done. Even a bought judge couldn't ignore evidence of coercion and fraud in front of 100 witnesses. I need time to review these documents, Blackwood said desperately. Then we'll reconvene tomorrow, Judge Mason announced as if he were still on the bench. And I'll be observing to ensure proper procedure is followed. As people filed out, Breslin passed close to Jake. This isn't over. Judges can be dealt with. Papers can disappear. And accidents. Accidents happen all the time on the frontier. Jake met his stare steadily. Touch my family, and you'll learn what kind of accidents a Confederate sharpshooter can arrange. That night, the storm came. It started as distant thunder rolling across the desert like war drums. By midnight, the wind was howling and rain fell in sheets that turned the dry earth to mud. But there was something unnatural about this storm's fury, as if the sky itself had chosen sides. Jake was checking the window shutters when he saw them, riders moving through the storm toward the ranch. Not one or two, but at least a dozen using the weather as cover. Company, he said quietly, and both women were instantly alert, reaching for weapons they'd kept close since the hearing. "Take Thomas to the root cellar," Jake ordered. "I can fight," Ayanna protested. "I know, but he needs you more than I do." She understood gathering the frightened boy and disappearing through the trap door they'd installed just days before. Sully took position at the back window with Jake's spare rifle, her hand steady despite the situation. The first shot shattered the front window, followed immediately by return fire from Jake's Winchester. The battle was joined, but this wasn't like the canyon fight. These men were professionals, patient, using the storm as cover. "They're trying to surround us," Sully called out, firing at shadows moving past the barn. Jake counted muzzle flashes, at least 15 men. Too many for a simple intimidation. Breslin meant to end this tonight storm or no storm. Then through the rain came a sound that made Jake's blood run cold. The whoosh of fire arrows. The Apache method, but these weren't Apache attacking. The barn caught first, the wet wood smoking, but eventually catching. Soon they'd try the house. "We can't hold," Jake admitted, hating the words, but Sully was smiling grimly. "Listen." Through the storm came a new sound, hoofbeats, dozens of them, and Apache war cries mixed with Mexican vaquero yells. Talon's warriors came from the north, the Hernandez clan from the south, and Tom Martinez's men from the east, catching Breslin's hired guns in a triangle of gunfire. The battle shifted instantly. The attackers, expecting easy victims, found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Jake saw Talon's arrow take one gunman from his horse, saw Old Man Hernandez and his sons fighting with the fury of men defending community, saw Tom Martinez himself trading shots with what looked like professional killers. In 10 minutes, it was over. The surviving attackers fled into the storm, leaving their dead and wounded behind. The barn was lost to flames, but the house stood intact. As the rain began to ease, Jake surveyed the battlefield that his ranch had become. "Is it safe?" Ayanna called from below. "Yes." Jake called back, then added with wonder, "We won." As little Thomas emerged wide-eyed but trying to be brave, the boy asked, "Did the monsters come, Papa?" "They did," Jake said, lifting him up. "But our friends scared them away." The next hour was organized chaos. The wounded were tended. Thankfully, none of their defenders were killed, though 2 of Tom's men were injured. The dead attackers were identified as hired guns from Texas and New Mexico men with prices on their heads in multiple territories. Breslin overplayed his hand, Tom said, accepting coffee from Sully with grateful hands. Hiring killers to murder a family. Even bought judges can't ignore that. Talon nodded, water streaming from his long hair. "The Reservation Council has voted. Any attack on your family is an attack on all Apache. Breslin just declared war on the wrong people." Old Hernandez spat tobacco juice with satisfied violence. "My family has been here for 5 generations. We've survived Spanish, Mexican, and American rulers. We'll survive Breslin, too." As dawn broke, revealing the full damage, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced since before the war. Belonging. These people had risked their lives not for payment or obligation, but because they'd chosen to stand together. The artificial lines between Apache, Mexican, and American had dissolved in the face of shared threat. Judge Blackwood arrived for the resumed hearing to find the town in uproar. News of the attack had spread, and angry citizens filled the streets. Some carried the weapons they'd used to defend the Hawkins ranch. Others held signs demanding justice. Inside the courthouse, Breslin sat alone. His lawyer had disappeared in the night, along with most of his hired men. He looked older, diminished his silver hair, no longer perfectly styled. "Your Honor," Judge Mason said formally, "in light of last night's events, I move for immediate dismissal of all challenges to the Hawkins family's marriage and custody. Furthermore, I recommend investigation into Mr. Breslin's role in what appears to be attempted murder." Blackwood, seeing which way the wind blew and perhaps genuinely shocked by Breslin's extremism, nodded quickly. "Dismissed. The marriage stands. The child remains with his parents." He fled the courthouse before anyone could demand more. Breslin stood slowly, his composure cracking. "You think you've won. I own half this territory. I have connections you can't imagine." Had Sheriff Coleman corrected, entering with iron shackles. "Samuel Breslin, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. The territorial governor wants a word about those connections you mentioned." As Breslin was led away, he locked eyes with Jake. "This isn't over." "Yes," Jake said quietly, "it is." The crowd erupted in celebration, but Jake felt mainly exhaustion. The crisis was past, but at what cost? The barn was gone, taking with it half their winter supplies. The house was damaged. They'd made a powerful enemy who might return. But then little Thomas tugged on his pants leg. "Papa Mama says we're staying. Sully Mama, too. We're all staying together." Sully Mama. The boy had decided on his own how to handle having two mothers. Jake looked at his wives. Strange to think of them that way, but after last night, what else were they? They'd fought for this home, bled for it, nearly died for it. "Yes," he said, "we're staying." The next weeks were a whirlwind of rebuilding. The barn rose again, bigger and better, as neighbors arrived daily to help. The Hernandez family brought adobe bricks. The Apache brought pine logs from the mountains. Tom Martinez's men worked sunrise to sunset, refusing payment beyond meals. During this time, Jake noticed changes in their relationship. Ayanna's hand would rest on his shoulder as she passed. Sully would lean against him while reading to little Thomas. Small touches, casual intimacies that spoke of growing trust and affection. One evening, as they watched little Thomas play with a wooden horse Jake had carved, Sully said quietly, "I've been thinking about Neshota's prophecy, about creating something new from broken pieces." And Ayanna prompted, "I think we're not just building a home. We're building a new kind of family, one that couldn't exist anywhere else but here in this place where cultures meet and mix." Jake considered this. A Confederate soldier, an Apache widow, a Mexican Apache woman, and a blue-eyed Apache boy were either the beginning of something or the end of everything. "The beginning," Ayanna said firmly. Neshota saw it. The eagle showed him. That night, the sleeping arrangements shifted again. Still 3 separate bedrolls, but arranged in a triangle with little Thomas in the middle, close enough that reaching out meant touching someone else. It wasn't passion that moved them closer, but comfort, the need for connection after facing death together. Jake woke in the deep night to find Ayanna sitting up, tears on her face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything. I keep thinking Thomas should see this, should know his son is safe and loved, should see what his sacrifice at Antietam led to." Jake moved closer, not quite touching, but present. Maybe he does know. Maybe that's what the stars are, windows for the dead to watch through. She leaned against him then just slightly, but it was enough. On his other side, Sully stirred, moving closer in sleep, seeking warmth or comfort, or both. Little Thomas in the middle of it all slept peacefully, surrounded by the family he'd chosen to trust. The storm had passed, the siege was broken, and they'd survived. More than survived, they'd been forged by crisis into something stronger. Jake thought of his old family lost to fire and war and realized he wasn't replacing them. He was honoring them by choosing to live, to love, to build again, despite the pain. Outside, thunder rumbled distantly, another storm approaching, but not yet arrived. This time, Jake didn't reach for his rifle. This time, he knew they could weather whatever came. They'd proven that together they were stronger than any storm. The crisis that should have destroyed them had instead revealed a truth Chief Neshota had seen from the beginning. Sometimes the strongest families are those forged by choice, rather than chance, built from courage, rather than convention, and held together by something more powerful than blood or law or tradition. They were held together by the simple revolutionary act of choosing each other again and again against all odds and obstacles. And in the American West of 1871, that might have been the most dangerous and beautiful thing of all. 6 months after the storm, the ranch at Crystal Creek had transformed into something that made passing travelers stop and stare. Where once stood a bachelor's bare-bones operation, now sprawled a compound that spoke of prosperity and purpose. The new barn was twice the size of the old. The house had grown by 3 rooms, and a schoolhouse was rising near the creek, its frame reaching toward the sky like hands in prayer. Jake stood on the porch watching little Thomas help Sully plant winter vegetables, while Ayanna worked with 3 Apache girls on traditional weaving. The girls' parents had asked if they could learn the white man's letters in exchange for teaching traditional crafts. It was the beginning of what Sully dreamed would become a proper school. "Mr. Hawkins," a voice called, and Jake turned to find a man in an expensive suit climbing down from a carriage. Not local. The clothes were Eastern, the carriage hired from Tucson. "Can I help you?" The man extended a manicured hand. "James Morrison, attorney at law. I represent the estate of Samuel Breslin." Jake's hand went instinctively to his gun. "Breslin's dead. Died in territorial prison 2 weeks ago. Heart failure, the doctor said, though some suggest he couldn't bear the loss of his empire." Morrison produced a leather folder. "Which brings me to my unusual errand. Mr. Breslin left specific instructions regarding your family." Jake tensed, but Morrison raised a peaceful hand. "Not what you think. It seems prison gave him time to reflect. He left you this." He handed over a sealed envelope. Jake opened it warily. Breslin's handwriting was shaky but legible. "Hawkins, I spent my life taking what I wanted, crushing what stood in my way. Prison teaches a man to see himself clearly. You built something I tried to steal because I couldn't understand it. A family not bound by blood, a community not built on fear. I was wrong. My empire is dust, but what you built survives. The water rights I fought for now belong to you and the Apache legally and permanently. Consider it payment for a lesson learned too late. S." Breslin attached were legal documents transferring significant water rights and 2,000 acres of prime grazing land to Jake, with provisions ensuring the Apache reservation's access to Crystal Creek in perpetuity. "Is this legitimate?" Jake asked, stunned. "Completely. Witnessed by the territorial governor himself." Mr. Breslin was quite specific. He wanted to, in his words, balance the ledger before meeting his maker. After Morrison left, Jake gathered his family to share the news. Ayanna was skeptical, Sully cautiously optimistic, but it was little Thomas who summarized it best. The bad man became good, like in Sully Mama's stories. "Maybe," Jake said. "Or maybe he just got tired of being bad." That evening, as they discussed what to do with their unexpected windfall, Jake noticed something had shifted. They no longer talked like 3 individuals sharing space, but as a unit planning a future. Ayanna suggested using part of the land for the school, creating dormitories for children from distant settlements. Sully wanted to establish a medical clinic, combining Apache herbal knowledge with modern medicine. Jake thought about raising horses, teaching little Thomas and other children to ride and train them. "We could build something lasting," Ayanna said, her eyes bright with possibility. "Something that bridges worlds instead of dividing them." The next morning brought another surprise. A letter arrived from the War Department forwarded through 3 territories to find Jake. His hands shook as he opened it, recognizing the official seal. "Captain Hawkins." It read, "Recent review of Civil War records has resulted in reconsideration of your status. Your actions at Antietam, specifically warning Union forces of Confederate positions, have been recognized as instrumental in preventing greater casualties. You are hereby granted full pardon for any acts during wartime and restored to honorable standing. Furthermore, a pension of $30 monthly is awarded retroactive to war's end. Signed, General William T. Sherman." Jake had to sit down. Sherman himself, the man whose march had cost Jake everything, had signed his pardon. The irony was overwhelming, but so was the relief. He was no longer a man running from his past, but one recognized for choosing humanity over sides. "This changes things," Sully said softly, reading over his shoulder. "Does it?" Jake asked. "You could go anywhere now. Start fresh without the weight of being a Confederate deserter." Jake looked at his wives, at little Thomas playing with wooden blocks at the half-built schoolhouse visible through the window. "I am starting fresh, here, with you." That night, for the first time, they all shared the main bed, not from passion, but from a need to be close after so much change. Little Thomas nestled between them like a small furnace, mumbling in his sleep in a mixture of Apache Spanish and English. Jake lay awake, Ayanna's head on his shoulder, Sully's hand resting on his chest, and felt something he'd thought lost forever: peace. The school opened a month later with 9 students, Apache Mexican, and 2 white children whose parents defied convention to give them the best education available. Sully taught reading and mathematics, Ayanna taught practical skills and Apache culture, and Jake taught what he called survival, everything from shooting to building to basic medical care. Word spread. By Christmas, they had 20 students, some boarding during the week. Parents paid what they could. Vegetables, labor, sometimes just gratitude. It didn't matter. The pension and the land Breslin had left them provided enough. One evening, as snow began falling, rare for the desert, but not unheard of, Jake found Ayanna alone by the creek, watching the water flow. "Regrets?" he asked, joining her. "No. Questions. Do you think Thomas would approve of us, of this?" Jake considered. "I think he'd understand that life doesn't stop when we lose someone. It changes, adapts, becomes something different, but not necessarily lesser. I dream about him less now," she admitted. "And when I do, he's smiling." "Sarah smiles in my dreams too," Jake said. "Her and Emma and Rose, as if they're glad I'm not alone anymore." Ayanna turned to him, then really looking at him for the first time, without the veil of grief between them. "We're not alone, are we? Despite how strangely we came together, we're really not alone." "No." Jake agreed and kissed her. It was soft, questioning nothing, like the passionate kisses he'd shared with Sarah, but it was real and present, and theirs. When they returned to the house, Sully was reading to little Thomas and several boarding students by the fire, her voice weaving stories that mixed cultures as naturally as the children themselves did. She looked up, saw something in their faces, and smiled with genuine happiness rather than jealousy. Later, after the children were asleep, the 3 adults sat together planning the spring planting. But the conversation drifted, as it often did now, to dreams and possibilities. "I've been thinking," Sully said carefully, "about adoption. There are so many orphaned children, mixed-blood children, especially, who need homes." "A bigger family?" Jake asked. "Why not till we have the room, now the resources, and little Thomas would benefit from siblings?" Ayanna nodded slowly. "The Apache way is to take in children who need care regardless of blood. It makes the tribe stronger." "And you?" Sully asked Jake. "Could you love children not your own?" Jake thought of little Thomas asleep upstairs, who shared not a drop of his blood, but had completely claimed his heart. "I already do." The decision, like so many of their decisions, made itself. Through the network of missions, reservations, and settlements, word went out that the ranch at Crystal Creek welcomed children who needed homes. By spring, they had taken in 3 more. Maria, a 6-year-old whose Mexican father and Apache mother had died of fever. Samuel, a 10-year-old former slave boy who'd walked from Texas alone. And Rose, the name made Jake's heart clench and heal simultaneously, a baby whose white mother had died, birthing her to an unknown father. The ranch became a small village. Tom Martinez joked that Jake was building his own town, but there was truth in it. They added dormitories for the school, a proper medical building where Sully worked with both traditional healers and a young doctor from back east who'd come seeking adventure. One day, Jake was teaching the older boys to break horses when he noticed a rider approaching. The man was elderly, moving stiffly, but something about his bearing was familiar. As he drew closer, Jake's breath caught. It was his brother Matthew, whom he hadn't seen since before the war. Jake. Matthew's voice was uncertain. "I've been looking for 3 years. Heard rumors of a Jake Hawkins in Arizona who matched your description." The brothers embraced 15 years of separation dissolving in that moment. Matthew stayed for a month marveling at the life Jake had built. "You've done something remarkable here," he said before leaving. "Mother and father would be proud. Sarah and the girls too. You've honored them by living fully." As summer arrived with its brutal heat and sudden beauty, the ranch hosted its first wedding, one of Talon's warriors marrying a Mexican girl from the Hernandez family. The ceremony blended 3 traditions with Reverend Mills, an Apache medicine man, and a Catholic priest, all participating. It was chaotic, beautiful, and perfectly representative of what Crystal Creek Ranch had become. That night, as the celebration continued under stars and paper lanterns, Jake found himself standing with his wives, watching their collected children play with others from 3 cultures, their laughter universal and uninhibited. "Chief Nashotah was right," Ayanna said softly. "We were the bridge, not just us, but what we created here. The wound between worlds." Suli added, "It's healing, child by child, lesson by lesson, day by day." Jake pulled them both closer, this unusual family that had somehow become everything. "You know what I realized? We're not broken pieces anymore. We're a mosaic, different pieces that make a picture only possible because of our differences." Little Thomas ran up, dragging Rose by the hand while Maria and Samuel followed. "Papa, the fireworks are starting. Mama, Suli Mama, come see." As they watched the fireworks, another cultural blend, Chinese explosives, celebrating an Apache-Mexican union at an American ranch. Jake felt the last of his old guilt dissolve. He would always carry Sarah Emma and baby Rose in his heart, but he no longer carried them as weight. They were part of the foundation on which this new life was built. The resolution hadn't come through violence or law, but through the patient work of building community, educating children, and choosing to trust despite having every reason not to. They'd transformed a ranch into a settlement, an arrangement into a marriage, and 3 broken souls into something approaching whole. The ghosts were quiet now, not silenced, but satisfied. The past was honored by the present's flourishing. And the future. The future was bright with possibility, complicated with challenge, but faced together. As the fireworks faded and the music resumed, Jake danced first with Ayanna, then Suli, then lifted little Thomas onto his shoulders, while the girls twirled around them. It was awkward and perfect, complicated and simple everything, and nothing like he'd imagined when he'd ridden into that canyon a lifetime ago. They'd built something new from broken pieces, just as Chief Nashotah had envisioned. Not just a family, but a community. Not just survival, but thriving. Not just tolerance, but celebration of differences that made them stronger together than they ever could have been apart. The wound between worlds was healing stitch by careful stitch, and they were both the surgeons and the sutures. The bridge and the builders, the past reconciled and the future emerging. 5 years had passed since Jake Hawkins rode into that canyon running from ghosts. Now, on a golden October afternoon, he stood watching nearly 100 people prepare for the harvest celebration at Crystal Creek Ranch. The place had become unrecognizable from his bachelor's hideaway. It was now a small town in all but name, with the schoolhouse medical clinic, dormitories, workshops, and the original cabin expanded into a proper hacienda. "Papa Jake, Papa Jake," a chorus of voices called as 6 children ran toward him. Little Thomas, now 9, led the pack, tall for his age, with his father's blue eyes shining with his mother's determination. Behind him came Maria Samuel Rose and the newest additions, twin Apache boys they'd named David and Daniel after finding them orphaned by cholera. "The stage is ready," Thomas announced importantly. "Suli Mama says we can start the play soon." The play was Suli's creation, a retelling of how the ranch began performed by the children for the harvest celebration. Jake had protested it was too grand, but Suli had insisted. "Stories matter," she'd said. "Our story most of all." Jake walked toward the main house where preparations were in full swing. Ayanna supervised the feast preparations with military precision, directing Apache women, Mexican senoras, and white frontier wives with equal authority. They worked together now, without the awkwardness of earlier years, their children's friendships having broken down the walls their generation had built. 40 pies, 60 loaves of bread, and enough barbecued beef to feed an army. Ayanna reported kissing his cheek casually. Such gestures had become natural over the years. Tom Martinez brought his whole extended family. The Hernandez clan is coming with their new in-laws. And look, she pointed to a line of wagons approaching. Jake recognized the lead wagon immediately. Judge Theodore Mason, the retired judge who'd stood up to Blackwood years ago. He'd become a regular visitor, eventually moving to nearby Willow Creek and serving as the school's legal advisor. Jake, the old judge, called out, climbing down with the help of a young woman. "I've brought visitors. This is Miss Catherine Summers from the San Francisco Chronicle. She's writing about frontier communities that are, how did you put it, my dear, building the future instead of fighting over the past," the young woman said, extending her hand with a confidence unusual for the era. "Your ranch has quite a reputation, Mr. Hawkins, a place where Apache Mexican and American children learn side by side, where mixed families are celebrated rather than scorned. That's a story America needs to hear." Jake shook her hand carefully. "It's not my ranch anymore. It belongs to everyone who's built it." And that Miss Summers said, pulling out a notebook, is exactly what makes it remarkable. As the afternoon progressed, the ranch filled with people. The school students performed their play on the makeshift stage, telling the story of 3 broken people who found each other through loss and built something from nothing. Little Thomas played Jake with serious intensity, while Maria portrayed Ayanna with fierce dignity. Samuel, despite protests that he was too tall, insisted on playing Suli, bringing laughter with his earnest delivery of her lines about building bridges between worlds. "It's not entirely accurate," Jake murmured to his wives as they watched. "Stories never are," Suli replied, her hand finding his. "But the truth of it, that's real." During the feast, Jake found himself seated at the head table, a position he'd resisted but couldn't escape. To his right sat Ayanna, still beautiful, but now with silver threading through her black hair. To his left, Suli, who'd grown from uncertain young woman to confident teacher and healer. Around them spread their extended family, not just their adopted children, but the entire community they'd helped create. Reverend Mills, older now, but still passionate, stood to give a blessing. 5 years ago, I performed a wedding that many called unholy, illegal, impossible. Today, I look at what that union has created, a place where children of all backgrounds learn together, where old wounds heal through new friendships, where the future is being written by those brave enough to let go of the past's hatred. To the Hawkins family, Tom Martinez called out, raising his glass, who proved that sometimes the best families are those we choose. To Crystal Creek, old Hernandez added, where my granddaughter learns Apache weaving and Apache children learn Mexican songs. To the bridge, Talon said now, a tribal leader himself, that Chief Nashota saw in his visions. As the toast continued, Jake felt overwhelmed. He excused himself, walking to the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch. There, marked by simple stones, lay several graves, workers who died naturally over the years, choosing to be buried at the place they'd helped build. But Jake stopped at the newest marker, a carved stone that read simply, "For those who came before." He'd placed it there last year, a memorial to Sarah, Emma, Baby Rose, and Thomas, the ghosts who'd walked with him so long. Not to forget them, but to honor them by acknowledging that life had continued, love had returned, and happiness was not a betrayal of their memory. "I thought I'd find you here," Ayanna said, approaching quietly. Suli was with her, the two women having become sisters in all but blood over the years. "Getting maudlin in my old age," Jake said, though 45 wasn't really old, just weathered by sun and experience. "Getting human," Suli corrected. "Remember when you couldn't sleep for the ghosts? Now you sleep surrounded by children who call you Papa and never question that you belong to them." It was true. The nightmares had faded, replaced by dreams of laughter, of teaching Thomas to shoot, of Rose's first words, of the twins learning to ride. The past hadn't disappeared, but had been integrated into a present too full of life to be haunted. "Miss Summers asked me what message our story sends," Ayanna said. I didn't know how to answer. Jake looked out over the ranch, at Apache children playing with Mexican ones, at white settlers sharing tables with former slaves, at his own complex family that no law fully recognized, but everyone accepted. The sun was setting, painting everything gold, and he could hear music starting, a mixture of Apache drums, Mexican guitars, and American fiddles. "That broken things can be rebuilt," he said finally. "That families aren't just blood, but choice. That communities grow stronger through inclusion, not exclusion. That the wounds between peoples can heal if we're willing to do the work." "That's a lot of messages," Suli laughed. "Then how about this? That love finds a way. Even when it seems impossible, especially when it seems impossible, love finds a way to grow through the cracks of our broken places." They walked back together, arms linked to find the celebration in full swing. Little Thomas was dancing with Rose, trying to teach her Apache steps while she insisted on ballet moves she'd learned from a traveling teacher. The twins were in a fierce checkers match with the Martinez boys. Maria was helping serve food maternal at 12 in a way that broke and healed Jake's heart simultaneously. Miss Summers approached them, her notebook away now. "Mr. Hawkins, Mrs. Hawkins, Mrs. Hawkins," she said, with a smile at the complexity of addressing them. "I've heard many stories today, but I'm curious. Do you ever regret how unconventional your life has become?" Jake looked at his wives, at his children, at the community spread before him. "Ma'am, conventional nearly killed us all. It was the unconventional that saved us." As the evening progressed, Judge Mason called for quiet. "I have an announcement. The territory of Arizona has officially recognized Crystal Creek School as an accredited institution. Furthermore, the water rights established by the late Mr. Breslin's bequest have been confirmed in perpetuity. And finally," he smiled broadly, "the federal government has approved the establishment of Crystal Creek as an official township with its own post office and everything." The cheer that went up could probably be heard in Tucson. Jake found himself lifted onto shoulders, protests ignored as the crowd chanted his name, but he redirected them, pointing to Ayanna and Suli, to the children, to everyone who'd built this dream. Later, much later, after the guests had gone home or found beds in the dormitories, Jake sat on the porch with his family. The children were exhausted, but fighting sleep, not wanting the magical day to end. Suli was singing softly in Spanish, while Ayanna braided Rose's hair. The twins were already asleep, leaning against each other like puppies. "Tell us the story, Papa," little Thomas requested sleepily. "The real one." Jake knew which story he meant, how they'd really come together, not the simplified version in the play. It started with an eagle's vision. He began and told them about Chief Nashota, about 3 broken people who chose each other, about communities that decided to build rather than burn. By the time he finished, all the children were asleep. Jake and his wives carried them to bed, tucking them in with the practice of years. Then the 3 adults returned to the porch, sitting close on the bench Jake had built that first summer. "No regrets?" Ayanna asked, echoing her question from years before. "None," Jake said firmly. How can I regret something that brought my son home and gave him siblings, that turned my grief into purpose, that gave me children to teach and love when my body couldn't create them? Sully added, never. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, the creek-flowing owls calling, the distant howl of coyotes that no longer sounded threatening, but simply wild and free. We did it, Jake said wonderingly. We actually built what Nashota envisioned. No, Ayanna corrected gently. We built more. He saw survival. We built a community. He saw 3 people helping each other. We created a place where hundreds help each other. We built a home, Sully said simply. A home big enough for everyone who needs one. As the moon rose over Crystal Creek, casting silver light over the transformed ranch, Jake Hawkins, Confederate soldier, grieving widower, accidental bigamist, beloved father, community builder, closed his eyes and felt perfectly, completely at peace. The ghosts were gone, replaced by living laughter. The wounds had healed, leaving scars that told stories of survival. The impossible had become inevitable through daily choice and stubborn love. Somewhere Jake thought Chief Nashota was smiling. The eagle's vision had come true, but more than that, it had exceeded even prophecy's imagination. 3 broken souls hadn't just survived together, they'd shown an entire territory how to thrive through embrace rather than exclusion. The message was simple, really carved into every board of the buildings, planted in every row of the garden, written in every lesson taught in the schoolhouse. We are stronger together than apart. Love is bigger than law. Family is what we make it. And sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the most broken ground. The end.